Good evening and welcome to Gibson's Bookstore Remote. I am Elizabeth, the events coordinator for Gibson's Bookstore, and I am joined this evening by Michael Kaufman, the author of The Last Exit. Michael is the author of 2 novels and 7 works of nonfiction. He has worked with the United Nations, governments, NGOs, educators, and companies in 50 countries to promote women's rights. But tonight we are here specifically to talk about The Last Exit, which is his newest thriller. This is available from Gibson's Bookstore, or rather, more are coming in because congratulations, Michael, you're on your 2nd printing. So more will be coming in. We do ship books and we are happy to do curbside pickup or in-store browsing. Michael, welcome to Gibson's Bookstore.
Great to be with you.
Can you tell me a little bit about The Last Exit?
Yeah, The Last Exit. Well, it's set in the near future in 2033 in Washington, D.C. It's a time when climate change is hitting hard. And it's, it's a crossover novel. It's set in the future, the near future. So it does sort of fit into that speculative fiction, science fiction niche a bit. It's also a police procedural. So it is in some ways a classic mystery. So it's been interesting seeing sort of reviews and which bloggers have picked it up and some say this is science fiction, this is a mystery. What is? It's a book. And it's a book that deals with some serious themes and serious issues, but it tells a story. I hope fun to read. Let me tell you where the idea came from actually, because I saw one of the people who checked in from Washington, D.C. So one of my novels, actually, I've written 3. One of them was co-written with my friend and at times work colleague, Gary Barker. And we wrote a number of years ago an anti-war fable called the Afghan Vampires Book Club. And a few years ago, we were walking around DC, just taking one of these long evening walks. And he said, Michael, I've got an idea for, another book we can write together. So we started riffing on his idea. And within a few weeks, we had gone off, in pretty different directions from where he had started. He's hard at work writing a literary novel. It's going to be terrific. I've, not only heard about it, but read bits. And so Gary Barker's book is going to be fun. I went off in a different direction. I decided, okay, I want to make this a detective story. I want to make this a mystery. So this is a society where, as I say, climate change is hitting hard. There's huge unemployment, partly caused by the impact of storms and climate catastrophes, but also by just our increasingly unequal economy. A lot of people out of work. Meanwhile, for the super rich, they've pulled off what we hear so much about that some of them are into, which is, coming up with some sort of longevity treatment, something that's going to keep these gazillionaires alive indefinitely. Well, so this is this world, and at the same time, there's a virus that's hitting people, particularly in their 40s and 50s, and killing off a huge number of people. So government comes along and adopts a new policy called exit. And the way it works is pretty simple and pretty awful. As a parent, if you decide to voluntarily die when you're 65, your children will get a modified version of this longevity drug. Now, you're not going to live forever, but they'll live in a healthy way into their 90s. They won't get this disease that's killing off so many people. And so partly it's a story about the lengths that parents will do to save their children, to look after their children. Well, into this mix, into this scene, comes our detective, Jen B. Liu, working for the Washington, D.C. Police Department. And she hears of an illegal version of this treatment being circulated. She starts to investigate. And this takes her down a more and more dangerous road to the point that her very life is in danger as she takes on the powers that be. Perhaps, we don't know, is she also taking on big pharma? We'll have to find out. I guess you have to read it. You have to, order this from Gibson's Bookstore if you haven't already. Anyway, it's a story that has dystopian elements. I mean, this thing of exit is horrific, and yet it's a fun book. It's a spirited book, and I think most important of all, it's a hopeful book. I didn't want to write some bleak dystopian novel. We have these novels and movies where it's sort of perpetual rain and neon splashing on the pavement and the sense of just hopelessness. That's not what I wanted to do. This book is set 12 years away. In most ways, the world is like ours. Things haven't changed that much. But I wanted there to be a sense of possibility for our future. I wanted to have a sense of our capacity as individuals and collectively to bring about positive change. So that's the world of The Last Exit.
So let's talk a little bit. I've got some questions here, and to our audience members, if you have a question that you would like to ask Michael, please feel free to pop that into the chat bar or the Q&A box. I guess my first question to you is it beneficial for humans to live forever? Or what are some of the ethical concerns of immortality and money and wealth disparity? And would you want to live forever?
It's wow. Yeah, I think for these uber rich, they're doing it. Their answer would be no. Most people shouldn't live forever, but for me, oh yeah, of course. No, I mean it's I think, and part of what the series is going to be, and it's going to be a series of probably about 5 books, maybe 6. We'll see over the next few years. But that's going to be one of the issues that I deal with. Just the who are we as human beings? Yes, it is wonderful that our life expectancy is greater than it used to be. That people in their 70s, 80s can still contemplate healthy, active lives. Those things are positive. But as human beings, we're creatures, we're animals, and I'm scared by that thought of some people being able to live indefinitely. And it's one of the ethical questions, one of the moral issues that comes out as a theme more and more as the series goes on. I just finished the sequel, actually, the first sequel, and it's already starting to bubble up more as, okay, there's a bit of a question around this. Should we aspire to live forever? My own answer is is no. Live long and prosper and all that, but forever, nah. They're just, for no other reason, there ain't room on the planet.
And when I was writing out questions for this, one of the things I wanted to ask you is were you inspired at all by vampire novels? Just because people who start to live forever and acquire wealth, one of the things I thought of was just vampires, just because, when you start a stock portfolio 100 years ago, you can still enjoy it in the current times. But a different question.
Yeah, finally, your game day stock will be worth something, I guess. Again.
Yes, yeah. So tell me a little bit about this has been in the real world a tough world for climate change and politics and healthcare and a virus, all of which, and the stratification of income and wealth disparity. So you did write this more than a year ago, right? That this isn't. Are you predicting the future? And if you are, please stop. Or write something more cheerful for us to look forward to. You tell us a bit about accidentally writing the current day.
Yeah, I'm waiting for. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm waiting for the first review that doesn't understand how long it takes to write a book and get it published, for someone to say, "Oh, this is headline chasing." Yeah, there's a number of things in this book that I guess were predictable, but maybe hadn't happened on that scale yet. In fact, on page 2, there's the last of a big forest fire in the Shenandoah Mountains, and smoke has been drifting into Washington, D.C. And yeah, I wrote this before San Francisco was turning orange last year. But I have my character Jen Liu, my protagonist, putting on a mask. And in the original, when I wrote it, I wrote, she put on her N95.
Oh,
And then when I edited it back in 2019, I was editing it. I thought, who the hell's going to know what an N95 is? So I had to sort of change the sentence to make it clear it was a mask that she was putting on. I mean, how things change. So yeah, there's this forest fire. It's not a virus. It's probably a prion-caused disease that is affecting large numbers of people. There's yes, the impact of climate change. There's also, as part of the backstory, is a movement in DC against police brutality and police racism. And I'm glad I got the timing off on that. That it's already we've seen the wonderful uprisings and protests and movement across the U.S. and beyond around Black Lives Matter. But in my book, there's part of the backstory is waves of protest. In the case of my book, it's participated in by both members, the public civil rights movement, women's movement, trade unions, but also some members of the police force who've had it with policing policies and practices and some of their own colleagues. So yeah, it's I don't think it takes a lot of crystal ball gazing, actually. You've just got to look around us. But that's the thing, Elizabeth. When we think about fiction nowadays and think about a mystery, it's true on one level. We read to get out of our daily existence, to escape from the headlines. But I didn't want to write something that was totally escapist. I wanted to engage. I want to engage politically. I want to engage socially. I want to think about the issues that are important to me, and I think important to a lot of readers. While they should be important to more leaders, but anyway, important to readers. But at the same time, this is not a political science lecture. I get to do that in my other books, my nonfiction books. So it's a fun story, but I really wanted it to be, to be engaged in the world that we're living in right this moment.
well, that actually ties in. There's an audience question that came in from Charles, who says, please tell us about your research for your novels. And I have this question here from myself. You've got a long career of human rights work. How did that inform this novel? And you mentioned political things that are important to you. Do you want to talk a little bit about your human rights work?
Yeah, well, I'll do that, and then I'll talk a bit about research. Yeah, I've been working over the past 4 decades to engage men to support women's rights, to work as allies with women to end men's violence against women, but also to positively transform the lives of men. And that work has taken me to, I guess, about 50 countries, working extensively with different UN agencies, governments, NGOs, trade unions, companies, universities, whoever will have me type thing. But it's been interesting work because when a few of us started doing this work back in the 80s, and I saw Matt Gervin from Kingston. He's one of the pioneers in this work from way back then. Very cool. Hello, Mac. It's been ages. And there weren't many of us, but we really felt that women should not be standing alone. We felt that we needed strong men's voices as allies with women, speaking out for positive and progressive change. And we felt very strongly that this was important not only to women, but to men ourselves. And part of that work takes me to Washington, D.C. And that goes back to the colleague and my co-author, Gary Barker, who started an incredible NGO called Promundo, which uses research and programming to develop work right around the world. And I'm a senior fellow at Promundo. And so that's how my research started, hanging out in DC. I live in Toronto, Canada, but getting to hang out in DC. And I know it's all that stuff about being a bureaucratic city and this and that, but I actually like Washington. It's got some very cool neighborhoods. It's got one of the most gorgeous urban parks in the world, perhaps the most gorgeous park. There's a number of scenes in the book in Rock Creek Park. So some of that research is just done at that level. Some of the research is, the usual these days. There's so much you can accomplish online. But one of the fun things about writing novels is you get to call people. You get to call total strangers and say, and you just have a question. You have a question about how weather works, or you have a question about, I don't know. Nothing just popped into my mind as I said this, but I know there's a scene where she goes to the scene of a fire and trying to figure out, is it arson? So I call a fire department. I speak to an investigator. So part of that research is just you roll up your sleeves and you get to be curious out loud. So I think that these themes, that preoccupation I've had as an activist, as an advocate, working for, thinking about human rights issues, I think they informed The Last Exit. Without, as I say, I absolutely did not want to turn this into a book that you feel I should read because it's a piece of homework or something. It tells a story, period. It's fun, I hope, period. But yeah, we can also have fun as we think about things that really affect our lives right now.
So let me go back to what you just said about writers getting to ask questions. Is that positively received by people? Do people love to talk about their work, to the minutia of their work to writers? I feel like writers get a pass to ask very strange questions. Like if the FBI or the NSA was monitoring your Google searches and they're just like, this person's searching how to dispose of oh no, it's a writer. It's a writer.
Yeah, both those things are true. I'm not going to talk about the sequel because it's it's going to be out in a year. We'll have another visit, but there is a scene where there's a body that's found and in the woods. And so, it's true. You're typing, how long do bodies decompose? How does the weather? And you're thinking, oh my God, who's reading this? But people love talking, particularly if you say I'm writing a work of fiction, and they just get into it, and it's fun. You're asking people, how does this work? How would someone get around a certain rule or law, or how would they pull this off? And so yeah, it's part of the fun, just calling strangers and letting people riff on what they do and what they think about.
Who was your favorite person to call, or like what was the favorite thing that you learned?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I mean, a favorite person to call, because we would hang out together in DC, was Gary, actually. But it would depend on what I was working on. If it was something that had a medical detail, I'd be calling my sisters, who I've got a medical ethicist who I think checked in there, Hannah, and my sister Miriam, who's a doctor, and other friends, and my daughter-in-law who's a doctor. So it would just depend on what I needed to know that day. But just having that those people just to call on and call in was, I think, part of the fun of writing.
That sounds like a tremendous amount of fun.
Yeah, I'm not, I talked to some writers who say, I never talk about my book. No one even knows what's in it until it's published. And, I don't even share it with my husband or wife or partner. And I'm thinking, you don't you want to, be able to talk a bit about it? And anyway.
So let's talk a little bit more about your book. The main character, it's not a spoiler to say, has a computer implant in her brain.
Yes.
Named Chandler.
Yeah.
And this computer implant is like an artificial like it's a personality, and it's her partner, quote, because partner doesn't have a body. And but this Chandler is Jen's link to the internet. What do you think it would be like to have your brain on 24/7, like instant access to cat videos or like news articles, just constant, like you literally could never shut off? Or conversely, what would it mean that the internet constantly has access to you? I mean, we've got privacy concerns with our smartphones right now, and apps on our phones. If it's literally in your brain, what could that bring up?
It's a horrific thought, isn't it? This implant in her brain, it's not really an internet implant. It's basically a biosynthetic computer. She's Jen, my detective, is part of an experimental program in the DC Police Department where a certain number of cops have this implant, and it's a biocomputer. One of its functions is this communications function. So if she needs data, she needs to, she sees someone, she wants to, identify a person, she wants to contact her captain, she wants to do a search on something, then Chandler can quickly do that. But I want to go beyond that. I want to go beyond just having this, computer link to the world, which would just be, I mean, I can't think of anything worse than it's bad enough, now with our habit of picking up our phone every 10 seconds and staring at it. But I want to go beyond that and again, explore this issue of a certain amount of merging of humans and computers. Some of it is incredibly positive. My wonderful friend Philip has an implant in his brain. He's got Parkinson's, and this helps regulate Parkinson's. So, I think there's some incredible things that are being done. It's a computer in his brain. But, there's also, this type of thing it can also be really scary. One of the amazing things that happened as I started to write this is how the personality of this bioimplant Chandler quickly developed. One of the things that both the early readers and subsequent readers said they've enjoyed most about The Last Exit is that Chandler, this biocomputer implant, narrates half the book or half the chapters. And so he's, you're hearing his voice. We're never directly hearing Jen's voice, except for in dialogue. We're hearing, and Chandler's this, he's this wannabe tough guy. Chandler, of course, named after Raymond Chandler, the great Los Angeles detective writer, and detective noir fiction. And Chandler's this sort of wannabe tough guy. The problem is he's 2.5 years old, and so he has a hard time pulling off the tough guy routine. So he's actually a lot of fun. But here's the thing, Elizabeth, that totally surprised me. In any good fiction, you want your characters to develop. It's true, there are some mystery series that you read, and you could read a book, that was written now or 30 years ago, and the character is exactly the same. And I don't quite get it. Like, don't you want your characters to evolve and develop? But anyway, they can be fun. But so I knew that my protagonist, Jen Liu, she'd develop both in the course of this book, but in the course of the series. I did not imagine for a second that Chandler was going to develop. But as this book goes on, suddenly he's doing things and saying things that I totally did not expect him to do. It's that quirky feeling that you always hear from from writers about characters having a life of their own. It's sort of a bogus concept. It just means that unconsciously you actually know your characters better than you've actually thought them through. But also, as the story evolves, characters evolve in relation to the story. And so Chandler just starts doing things he ain't programmed to do. I think that's part of the fun of the book. It's also part of what's going to lead to some of the questions that I get to ask as the series goes on.
So it's also not a spoiler that when Jen digs a little bit too deep, she is told to back off. Things happen. Chandler is switched off.
Yeah.
That's in the book description, not a spoiler.
Okay.
But Chandler is a person. I mean, not a person, but Chandler is like an artificial intelligence. It's more than just a computer program now.
More than just a computer, yeah.
That raises some ethical concerns. Like, is that murder? to switch off.
I never thought of that. It is a, you know, as a reader will see, it is a major plot point that happens, and yeah, I won't go into it, but yeah, you know, it's I mean, there's a lot around here. I mean, there's one of the subplots is Jen's boyfriend doesn't know about Chandler. The two of them met after Chandler was put into her brain. She's been told, you cannot tell anyone, this is a secret program, and she rather stupidly doesn't tell him. And at some point, you know, not too far into the last exit, she spills the beans. I mean, can you imagine finding out that the person you're sleeping with is a menage a trois? I mean, even though he's officially turned off, I mean, it's pretty weird and creepy. So I get to have some fun with that too.
I mean, it gives me the willies. I'm not gonna lie. Just to think, like, you like to think that you're in control of your body and control of your thoughts, and to have a whole other person. I call Chandler a person. You know,
yeah.
But to have another personality inside your head, you can't just take them out. I mean, theoretically, that's a loss of control, which terrifies me as a person. But you're also responsible for that person at that point as well. So to have your friend turned off it just horrified me. So well done. Let's talk a little bit about Jen. When did the character of Jen B. Liu first speak to you? And did you have the story first, like your story idea? I know you said that you bounced off a root idea with a friend, but did you have your idea first, or did you have your character first?
The idea first. As I said, the germ of it came from my friend Gary Barker, of a near future. There's surveillance going on. There's some sort of disease that's killing people. And then, as I say, I took off from there. So it took me a while before I ended up with Jen Liu as my protagonist. But once she arrived, she was there. I mean, it's funny. She was pretty clear in my head from the start. Someone with issues. I didn't want to create a superhero. One of the jokes in the book is that her partner wants her to be more, her partner, meaning her detective partner, wants her to be more assertive and tougher, and so plays with her name, which is Jen B. Liu, and just riffs on it and says, you need something, a superhero sounding, and starts calling, puts together her middle initial and last name to be Blue, and starts calling, and she's got blue eyes, which is obviously quirky for a woman of Chinese descent, which Jen is, and starts calling her Cobalt Blue. But I had this image of this woman who is, like all of us, has our frailties, vulnerabilities, fears, has some real issues from her childhood, and yet isn't your stereotypical, hard drinking, hard living detective who's all screwed up, but has issues and is dealing with them or not dealing with them, and as we all do and don't do, but is really struggling to be her own person in the world, and that mirrors, I think, struggles of women in workplaces, struggles of people of color in a racist society, and again, so those are themes that I wanted to be able to explore. There are also things at a personal level, and you'll see this if you are someone who reads the acknowledgments in it. My wife is of Chinese descent, was born in Hong Kong, and grew up in Canada. And again, just being exposed to the challenges and struggles she faces. There's this thing, Elizabeth, that I don't have to tell you about. But certainly as a man, as a man with white skin, as a straight guy, when you're in a position of relative social power because of your sex or the color of your skin or your sexual orientation, it means that I'm able to walk around carrying all sorts of forms of privilege. It doesn't make me a bad person. What I might do with it could make me a bad person, but it's this sort of invisibility of the experience that you have when you enjoy forms of privilege. And, it's been, both because the work that I've done supporting women's rights and being just pushed and challenged by women over the years. And since I was young, living in North Carolina when I was, way back in the 60s as a kid, and being, confronted with racism, segregation when I first moved there. And, just being pushed to get out of my comfort zone and have to do some serious listening. Have to do serious listening, whether it's around sexism or racism or homophobia. And so, I wanted to, I wanted to reflect some of that. What we can all learn when we try to not pretend that any of us can live in anyone else's shoes. I think that would be a bit naive. But at least, try to, by some really hard listening, by some thoughtful listening, to learn about other people's experiences. And I think that, as I did, this character came to life, at least in my eyes, and I hope in the reader's eyes as well.
That's such a great answer, and not something I often hear from men. So this is your ovation right here.
Well, the ovation is back to women who have been pushing me and many other men, I have to say.
So do you employ how do you, it sounds like you have a lifetime of research, but do you employ sensitivity readers to find your blind spots? And Janine in our audience also wants to know what about your younger self made you such a feminist? Because that is not the common reaction to being confronted with privilege, is not usually, sadly, to delve into it and to self-reflect.
So, where it started, I mentioned North Carolina. My family moved there from Ohio, where I was born, in 1960. So things were still racially segregated. And, as a kid, particularly, a few years later, grade 5, 6, 7, you want to do what you want, as a little kid, you want to do what the other boys and girls are doing, but, I guess probably more so boys given everything at that time. And I remember once I wanted to go to a movie, and my parents had a basic rule. And we didn't go to any of the theaters because they were segregated. We didn't go to most restaurants because they were segregated. And my friends were going to some movie, and I really, really wanted to go. And they said, no, you can't go. And I said, well, why not? And they explained once again, they said, as long as everyone can't go, we don't go. And so they taught me early on that we've got to make decisions. We can't just, have beliefs. We have to act. We have to act according to those beliefs. And when a group when there are groups that are experiencing discrimination, really terrorism. These were, there were cross burnings, there were lynchings going on in North Carolina at that time. You had to take sides. And so my parents taught me early on that, you can't just be a spectator. You've got to speak out. And, I got beat up for that. I got, all those things you learn, you've got to take sides. So when the women's movement started in the late 60s and early 70s, all my friends were feminists. I'd already been trained. I've got 4 sisters, and I had a wonderful mother and a very loving father. And I was raised with a set of values based on equality and a belief in equality. And when I started hearing that so many women faced something different, it was pretty awful. And I was pushed. I was challenged by women. I screwed up in 1,000 different ways, but just kept coming back and trying to make a difference. And I think that's all any of us can do. We have to find ways to, as we're finally hearing people saying, not just calling people out, but calling people in, calling men into feminist struggles, calling white people into support anti-racist struggles, straight people supporting LGBTQ folks, And I don't just mean at the individual level, but supporting policy changes, supporting programs, supporting just a questioning of who we are and how we function as a society. We've got to take it personally. This is personal stuff. And it's stuff not to be scared of, and not to be scared of making mistakes, because we all will make mistakes. But we just have to, you make those mistakes, you dust yourself off, you get up again, and you say, okay, tell me more. Tell me, I'm here to listen. I'm here to learn.
I had an event this summer with a fantasy author, R.A. Salvatore, and he made this wonderful point. And he's like, it's not enough to be woke. You don't want to be woke. You want to be constantly waking. Because growth, I mean, it's what was okay at this point in time is you go forward a few years, and if you're still here and society needs to be here, it's not, you can't just stop. You have to be constantly learning and growing and pushing yourself. So I appreciate all of these efforts. I have a son. And I want him to grow, and some of the things that frustrate me is that there's so much pushback, and it's like promoting and lifting up women also benefit men. Having a rising tide lifts all ships, but the concepts of like the toxic masculinity also not only affects women, but it also affects men, that they're not allowed to share feelings. They're not allowed to accept anger. You're allowed to share anger as a man. But it's the advancement of the feminist movement also benefits men.
Yeah.
So
it's so true. And that's one of the themes of, I think you can maybe see on the shelf behind me, this other book, my book that came out 2 years ago, The Time Has Come, Why Men Must Join the Gender Equality Revolution. And it talks exactly about that we have this very strange paradox. We live in a male-dominated society. Men have more power. We make more, we earn more money. We're less vulnerable to violence in the home, at least. Outside the home is a different matter. We're more likely to be in positions of power in the workplace. The list goes on. And yet, when we look at the lives of men also, die younger, are more likely to be in prison, or less likely to go to a doctor for help, or more likely to be addicted to alcohol and other drugs. In other words, men have constructed our ideas of men's power and masculinity in a way not only to dominate over other women, but also to dominate each other, to dominate one group of men over another. And I think a lot of men, most men, all of us on some level as men, walk around in real fear of being discovered as not a real man, not tough enough, not whatever enough. And so there's this sort of lifelong charade that really drags men down. And that's why feminism is such a blessing, because, the women's movement and feminism is a celebration of women's capacity for change and for equality, and to just, jettison the trappings of this gender binary. And I think it holds a different, maybe you could say opposite, whatever, but the same sort of set of promises to men ourselves. And that's really something to celebrate. One of the things, and one of the places that we see that change happening right now in our lives. And I want to say this to you, Elizabeth, because it's not just bleak for your son. How old is he, by the way?
He's 6. He's almost 7.
He's got some tough years ahead, absolutely. But he is moving into a world where, as a man, he's going to be both expected to and allowed to celebrate his capacity to be a nurturer. I mean, yes, there's still an imbalance in who does childcare and housework in our homes, and yet men are doing much more of that than we were 20, 30 years ago. We're seeing, a celebration of a much greater range of sexualities and gender expressions among men, things that were not even spoken about or were illegal, 20, 30, 40 years ago. In some, states more recently, now are not just, legal and out there, but are just just normal because they're just normal. Again, that's part of the positive. There's this dystopian stuff in the last exit, but there's also positive stuff. It's not question that that Jen's partner Les is living with is married to a man, another man. It's just. Yeah, it's just the way it is. It's part of our lives. So I think that we have to celebrate. We have to be wary of things that stand in our way to live better lives, but at the same time we can celebrate our capacity as humans to bring about change, both individually and collectively. And so in that sense, even though we keep mentioning elements in the last exit, oh yeah, he's got this computer implant, there's this disease, there's exit, it sounds like, oh my God, what a grim future. And yet there's also elements in there which really, I think, really show alternatives, people building alternatives in their own life, people creating futures that are focused around meeting human needs, not just, making someone more money or something like that.
Well, one of the things I do love about the current crop of books coming out is the casual representation of, I think books even 10 years ago would make a big deal about a same-sex marriage, and to just have it casually in a book and be like, that's normal. There's no need to make a big fuss of it. Or casual, emotionally intimate male friendships. That's one of the things, honestly, I'm looking forward for my kid. And I'm very grateful that my husband can positively demonstrate emotional intimacy among friends without, that's what I'm looking forward to for him. But let's get, we've gotten off track and I'm deeply enjoying this, but we have a time limit. So I'm going to hop back to audience questions. We have one from Charles.
Yeah, we're finishing by 6 tomorrow morning, right? I think we decided.
I'm going to need another water. Charles asks, Michael, I'm seeing a recent trend of blending fiction, mystery, and ecology themes, like think the Crawdads or Migration or Last Exit. What do you think about this?
Yeah, it makes sense. If we think we've been buffeted by COVID over the past year, this is small potatoes compared to what climate change and the climate crisis is going to be doing to us in the world. It is absolutely terrifying, and I think that as human beings, I want to read. I want to read to escape. Of course, I want to read to just get my mind and my brain in another place. But at the same time, it just becomes increasingly unrealistic if the fiction that is written, the fiction that some of us write, isn't lodged in the world that we live in now. And it's a world of unbelievable inequality. It's a world of marching towards a precipice in terms of the climate. I mean, in part, the COVID is the result of the human encroachment on the natural environment. That's where it came from, so it's. I think it's telling. I think it's positive. There was this whole huge movement that's still with us, and we saw it so strongly developing in the 60s and 70s and 80s, the 90s. I mean, still with us. The fiction should not be political. I keep seeing interviews with writers, including some writers I love, who just says, I'm not a political person. I don't believe that fiction should deal with political issues. And I mean, it's just nonsense, because what are political issues? Now, I'm not saying that fiction's got to deal with electoral politics, but political issues. Politics is about the exercise of power, whether it's the power within relationships, whether it's gender power, whether it's power based on the color of our skin. These are our realities, and so I think it is good that we're seeing more and more writers who are saying that this dogma of fiction is just fiction. It just deals with somehow, personal relationships that are sort of devoid of the surrounding environment, or mysteries that are devoid of the surrounding environment. We've got to engage I mean, as a, as someone writing mysteries right now, and police procedurals, because it is in part of what this is a police procedural. It involves, a police officer figuring out who done it, or what happened first of all, but then who done it. Um, you know, I think there's a big issue there. I have an article that's coming out in the online magazine Crime Reads, that talks about police procedurals in the era of Black Lives Matter. I think it's going to be out in a week or two, and uh, and um, and I think these are serious issues. I read some detective stories, and they may be wonderfully written, but it's just this old framework of cops are just uniformly good and they're there to uphold the law and do the right thing. And you've got a few rogue cops perhaps, and maybe the odd racist cop or sexist cop, but basically it's just they're it's the straight and narrow. And you're thinking, what world does this writer live in? It's way more complicated than that. So I think that we need to problematize those things. I want to see more of our mystery writers. I want to see more of our, particularly the near future science fiction writers, speculative fiction writers, taking on these issues, but not just taking it on as, okay, now the issue of, police racism, but just having it part of the world that our stories are living in, just like it's part of the world that we live in. I think that's a positive trend. So yeah, thank you for that question.
So we're just about out of time. So let me ask you, what's next for you?
Wow, well, a few different things. As I said, I just finished the sequel to The Last Exit. So I won't tell you anything about it because who knows if it's still, I'll be editing it and this and that, and it'll be, I guess, coming out a year from now. So we'll get to return and talk about it then. I just finished work on a screenplay based on my first novel. Probably will never see the light of day, but it was great fun to do, and who knows? I've been at work off and on a novel that explores sort of the '60s generation, and I'm about, now that I've finished the sequel, I'm about to turn back to that. And plus, even though my travel ended overnight almost a year ago for my work, there is sort of online events that I do still do some speaking and volunteer work on issues around gender equality. So that keeps that keeps happening, and all the usual COVID stuff. I tend to be the cook and the baker in the family, and doing even more of that this year. Getting out to run every couple of days, which in Toronto in the winter is absolutely no fun at all. I guess you're having a bunch of snow in New Hampshire right now as well.
We are. It's actually a snow day for my kid, which is actually fairly rare for remote schooling. But I'll tell you one thing about that I hope COVID leaves behind is being able to wear a mask in the winter. Because my face is warm, because it gets
it's not too bad, is it? Yeah.
I like to joke that we live north of the wall, and it gets very cold in the winter, and like your nose freezes and your eyes burn, and wearing a mask helps quite a bit. So I will be keeping mine after all this is over. I have to ask, did you do the sourdough bread? You said you're the baker.
Yeah. I haven't baked much bread over the years, but this year, yeah, I've been baking bread.
All right. So thank you for joining us this evening. The Last Exit is available from Gibson's Bookstore. We offer curbside pickup, in-store shipping, in-store shopping, and we do offer shipping for online orders or phone orders. This book, we are looking forward to getting our second printing. Congratulations again in the store. Thank you, Michael, so much for joining us, and everybody joining us from home.
It's been really fun being with you, and enjoy the rest of the winter, Elizabeth.
Have a great night, everybody.
And thank you to everyone for coming tonight.
Good night.
Bye-bye.